All right, hello everyone. We are going to walk through Lab 5, which is about geodatabases and the attribute table. So, we are taking a step back this week and focusing on the basics of some of the data structures and data types that comprise a lot of the ArcGIS Pro labs, exercises, and lessons that we will cover in this course. So I have a session of ArcGIS Pro open up here. And to start the lab, I'm going to go ahead and open a map blank template. I'm going to name the project. I'm going to call it Geodatabases and Attributes. Click OK. It says the file name of this project already exists because I already named it that, but we're going to have to use another one. So I'll call it 2. Just label it 2. Keep it simple. All right, so we have our view of the map, world topographic map, listed here with the United States lower 48 presented in front of us. So the first thing we need to do when we are in ArcGIS Pro is import data. If we have any data, it will always be listed in the contents bar, which is over here on the left-hand side. And currently we only have the world topographic map and world hill shade, which we can click on and off and activate if we want to. But if we want to add more data, then we've got to come over here to map and click add data, or we can click and drag it in if we already have the folder pulled up. There's really no difference between these two methods. It's just that how we get to the data is a little bit different, and then how the data is shown to us in those two methods, ranging from add data to the file explorer itself, it'll just look slightly different. So within add data, this will only show us data that we can readily add to the contents bar and to our ArcGIS Pro session. Whereas within the file explorer, it will show us a bunch of other files that we can't necessarily import into ArcGIS Pro and manipulate within the contents bar. So we can go ahead and click this shapefile and add it. And what we see is that we are taken to a zoomed in image of, can you guess what this is? If you guess the state of Tennessee, you are correct. This is the state of Tennessee, and this data set is from the census, and it shows points of landmarks throughout the state of Tennessee. So we have our data set, and we're now ready to begin working on a couple of the different exercises within the lab. The lab walkthrough will go through this a little bit differently than I will in the video, but if you are stuck, you can come in here and I will reference which question what I'm walking through relates to in the paper document. So I'm going to start with step 1 here, which is create a file geodatabase. So geodatabases store geographic information, and they're good for just keeping your data organized as you work on pretty large and robust projects within ArcGIS Pro. So to find or make a geodatabase, we can come over here to folders. And when we click down folders, we see we have Geodatabases and Attributes 2. And we can click this down. And what we see that we have here, right here, this is already a Geodatabases and Attributes 2 geodatabase file. So just by making this project, we got a default geodatabase created for us. The other thing we see here is an import log. And this is basically exactly as it reads. Any data or information that we import into our ArcGIS Pro session, we can find that here. And then we have a .tbx, which is a toolbox. And this means any plugins or anything, external tools that we install, we can find here at .tbx. So the first step tasks you with creating a geodatabase. You already have one made, but we want to make another one. So if I come up here to the name of my project, Geodatabases and Attributes 2, I can right-click it, and I see this new option, and then under that new option, when I hover over it, I get these other options here. And one of those other options here at the bottom is New File Geodatabase. And if we hover over it, we see that the description says create a new file geodatabase. So I can click that, and it pops up, New File Geodatabase, and I can go ahead and name it. I'm going to name it the best geodatabase.gdb. You can call yours whatever you want, but I'm going to call mine the best geodatabase.gdb. So now moving on to step 2. Step 2 says import the Tiger Census Landmarks shapefile. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that. Again, you're dealing with data. So we can click and drag, and I'll show you both methods. But the first one is we can import it. So if I right click, I'm going to use the default created geodatabase here. I'm going to come down here to import, and I'm going to import a feature class because we're importing a shapefile, not just an attribute table. And ArcGIS Pro is going to process for a second. It's thinking, doesn't know if it wants to work or if it does. And so our input features are wherever our data set is. I'm going to click OK. And what is our output feature class? Well, that's whatever we want it to be. We can name it however we want. And we know this is a data set of Tennessee landmarks, so I'm going to call it Tennessee Landmarks. And I can ignore all of this other stuff down here, but basically if we wanted to manipulate the data while importing it, this would be a good spot that we could do that at. But we don't need to touch any of this stuff for now. And I'm just going to click Run. And it's going to do some processing. And we see we get a success message with a check mark. And now we can exit out of this. And if we look over in our contents pane, we see we have Tennessee landmarks. So what's the other way we can do this? Well, the good old-fashioned click and drag. And on this one, oh, wait a sec. Wait, it's not working. What happened? Why isn't it working? Well, that's kind of a gotcha. The reason why that's not working is because you can't click and drag into a geodatabase. Because with geodatabases, when you import data, that data is typically verified and checked to make sure that it is working and it is a good data set. And so importing is always the best thing you can do in order to make sure your data are proper and ready to work with. But what if I wanted to populate the best geodatabase with a feature class? Well, I can just click and drag this over, and we can see it's running, and boom, I have another copy of Tennessee Landmarks. And if I bring this over, I now have 2 copies of Tennessee Landmarks. That's kind of confusing to have both of them named the same thing. So I'll remove one, come back over here, and I'll rename this. I'll call it 10 marks. And so now this is 10 marks, and I can import my 10 marks by just clicking and dragging it over. And now I have a feature class called Tennessee Landmarks and a feature class called 10 marks. So play around with the geodatabases, make a couple different geodatabases, copy over the data set into the geodatabases, delete the data set from the geodatabases. So come over and delete it. Practice adding data from the geodatabase. So there's a right click and then add to current map, or we can add it to a new map if we wanted to make a new map. We can also view the metadata, which is here within the file, and we can see we have our extent for the file itself. So this is our spatial coordinate extent, showing the upper left, upper right, lower right spatial extent for this file. And we can play around with it. We can view the properties. So this way we can see where it's saved. We can check the spatial reference of the geographic coordinate system that it's in, and look at those details as well. So this is where we can really inspect things before we start playing around with it. Okay, moving into the next step, understanding the existing attribute table. So we have our Tennessee landmarks pulled up, and what we need to do here is just look at the attribute table. So let's right click and take a look at the attribute table. Here's our attribute table. We can see on the attribute table that we have a couple of different columns: object ID, shape, state, FP, that stands for state FIPS ID, I believe, ANSI code, point ID, full name, MTFCC, and whoa, it looks like I may have two columns that you probably don't have. I'm going to delete these real quick. Spoiler alert. So really, that's your first challenge here. This data set comes with this information alone: object ID, shape, state FP, ANSI code, point ID, full name, and the MTFCC, which I believe is like county code. And what we really want is to get some latitude and longitudinal coordinates put into this attribute table. So moving into step 4, we need to add some columns to this attribute table. And we can do that up here on the field bar by clicking add. We'll do longitude and hit enter. And then we come over here and double click the data type, and we want double. And the reason why we want double is because a double data type basically has values after a decimal place. And that's what a longitudinal value is. So we have our longitude value. We also need another value. That will be our latitude. And if we double click, double again. All right, so we've added 2 columns. What do we need to do now? Well, we need to save it. So if we come up here, we see the save with the floppy disk. If you can describe what a floppy disk is without using the internet to do so, I'll give you 1 extra point on this assignment. So we click save, we exit out, and if we come back over and open our attribute table again, now we have longitude and latitude with a bunch of null fields. So what do we need to do next? Well, before we move into the next step, really get a feel for your attribute table. Learn how to open it, learn how to sort through information here, learn how to delete columns and save it and then add columns again, learn how to sort through columns. So for example, we have a point ID which points to each individual landmark within our data set. What if we want to filter on only items that have full names associated with the point ID? So what I did there was I double clicked and I sorted everything, and stuff that was empty was basically at the top of my sort and everything that was filled was beneath it. But now I know what doesn't have a full name associated with the point ID, and I can attempt to get rid of it. And I'll leave that as an exercise for you all. But another thing I can do is sort descending. And now this is in reverse alphabetical order. And I can see all my attributes that have a full name along with a point ID and other information. And I can sort and play around with that as well. But the next step I want to do is fill these columns with latitude and longitudinal values. So if I come over here and I click on longitude, what I want to do is come up here to table, and I want to do calculate geometry. And so table has a lot of different tools. And this is just before I click calculate geometry, that you can do a couple different things. You can calculate a field, you can summarize a column, you can do joins, which you already have some experience doing. You can do relates, you can export a table out of ArcGIS Pro, so that way you just have the table information and not necessarily a shapefile. But for the purpose of this exercise, the only thing I want you to really do is calculate the geometry, which we're going to do here. And we're trying to calculate all of the longitudinal values into a column. And so we have our target field, which is longitude, and we're going to click either X or Y. I won't do it on screen for you, but you need to select one of these. If you picked point Y, then you got it correct. And we'll let that run. And it takes a little bit to run, but now we see that our longitude column is populated with the longitude values. And if I click on latitude, come over here, click latitude, and we already used the Y coordinate, so we're going to use the X coordinate, and we're going to run again. And now we have a longitude and latitudinal values for each point, along with full names for some of those points. So at this point, your task is to go through and essentially play around with the attribute table. Add a new field. Again, that button is over here. Duplicating feature classes. So essentially making a copy of this data, which you can do by right-clicking and copy. And you've copied it. So how do you make a copy of it and have that copy show? Well, you just paste it. And now you have two different versions or two different instances of the same data set. So before you add any fields, you might want to try duplicating or storing another copy. You also have a copy within your geodatabase. And the last thing, after you've played around with all of those different features and you have a good handle for how to manipulate the information within the attribute table and the geodatabase, is try to remove all of the blank cell fields from the attribute table so that the only points that show are the ones that have full names. That's the first optional task. And the second one, which is a big bonus task, is to only plot points within Knox County and then create a new column which has landmark descriptions, which you would generate using information from the internet. And then once you fill those landmark descriptions, make sure that you can click the points and view the information along with the full name of that landmark within Knox County. And with that, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out for us for more information.